The vast, unforgiving landscape of the west stretched out endlessly under the blazing sun, where the only sound was the whisper of the wind through the dry brush. The horizon was an endless canvas of golden dust, broken only by jagged mountains that stood like silent sentinels, witnesses to countless stories of survival, struggle, and loss. The heat seemed to hang in the air like a heavy, suffocating cloak, and the earth itself felt as though it had been scorched by a fire that never truly went out. In the midst of this desolation, Claire walked alone. Her boots, worn from endless travel, kicked up clouds of dust each step, her gait steady but weary. She had come from a place of darkness, a place where hope had been suffocated by pain and fear. Now, as the town of Redwood Ridge loomed in the distance, she hoped it could be the shelter she so desperately needed, even though she knew deep down that peace was not something easily found, especially when the ghosts of the past refused to stay buried. Claire's face, though weathered from her journey, still held the trace of something youthful, the promise she might have been before the world had broken her spirit. Her eyes, a clear, searching blue, scanned the horizon with a guarded hope. She had given up everything to escape the man who had once promised to love her, only to turn her world into a cage. She had fled across the land, a woman without a name, a woman without a future, hoping the wilderness would be enough to keep the horrors of her past at bay. But the land was vast, and there was no escaping the way the past followed her, even across the miles. She reached the town's edge just as the sun began to dip below the mountains, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out and swallow everything in their path. The town looked small, a cluster of buildings huddled together like survivors of some great storm. It was quiet, almost eerily so. She hesitated before crossing the threshold of the town, as if waiting for some sign that this would be different, that here she could rebuild herself. Then she heard it, the sound of hooves. The noise was faint at first, but it grew louder, the steady rhythm of galloping horses echoing across the empty streets. Claire turned instinctively, her body tensing, ready for whatever the desert would throw at her next. Through the thick dust, a figure appeared. A man, a cowboy. His silhouette was unmistakable, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing the faded, worn clothes of someone who had lived far too long on the road. His horse kicked up the dirt as he approached, the hooves slicing through the silence like a blade through fabric. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but Claire could see the roughness of his features, the hardened lines of someone who had lived through too many battles, too much pain. The cowboy slowed as he drew near, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. His gaze was intense, searching, as though he too had been looking for something or someone to make sense of this world. "You're new here," he said, his voice slow and gravelly, carrying a weight of unspoken history. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to be noticed, much less approached, but something in his eyes, something in the way he spoke seemed to reach out to her, like a whisper from a past she didn't want to confront. "I'm just passing through," she replied, her voice steady but guarded. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. He seemed to recognize the weariness in her stance, the quiet desperation that lingered beneath her calm exterior. He knew what it was like to carry the weight of a life lived in shadow, to be marked by pain and regret. And yet, in his eyes, there was a flicker of something else, something that felt like a possibility, a future. "You'll need a place to stay," he said, almost as if it were a statement of fact. "The ridge might be small, but it has shelter for those who need it. People like us." Claire blinked, taken aback. She didn't want to be noticed. She didn't want to need anyone. But something in his words, in the quiet understanding that seemed to pass between them, made her wonder if this town could be the haven she sought. "Thank you," she murmured, though a part of her hesitated to let down her guard. She had learned the hard way that trusting strangers could lead to heartbreak or worse. The cowboy nodded, tipping his hat slightly, his face unreadable. He turned his horse and began to ride off, his figure fading into the shadows as the sun dipped lower. But before he disappeared entirely, he glanced back over his shoulder, his voice carrying on the wind. "If you need something more than shelter, don't hesitate to ask." For the briefest of moments, Claire felt a spark of hope, something that had long since been extinguished in her heart. She didn't know if she was ready to open that door again, but she knew this was the first time in a long time that someone had offered her more than just a place to hide. The cowboy, though marked by his own pain, had given her the chance for a future if she was brave enough to take it. And with that, the dust settled once more, and the sun disappeared behind the mountain, leaving only the promise of a new chapter yet to be written. Claire sat alone in the small, dimly lit room she had rented for the night, the flickering candle casting long shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The quiet was oppressive, pressing against her chest, and the weight of the day's events hung heavy in the air. She could still feel the cowboy's presence, his words lingering like smoke, too close for comfort. People like us. The phrase echoed in her mind, gnawing at her. Was she really like him? Could she really be part of this world, this town, these people? Or was she just another lost soul passing through, destined to fade into the wilderness once more? She leaned back against the wall, her head resting on the rough wooden surface, and closed her eyes. The night was dark outside, the silence only broken by the occasional howl of a distant quail. Inside her mind, however, the noise was deafening. The flood of memories she had fought so hard to bury came rushing back, uninvited and unrelenting. You'll never amount to anything, Claire. You are nothing without me. The cruel words of her ex-husband rang in her ears, as they always did when the darkness closed in. She had run, yes, but the scars he had left on her heart were not so easily erased. She could still feel the sting of his insults, the weight of his control, the suffocating fear that had wrapped around her throat every day. Leaving had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it had been necessary. Or so she told herself. The cowboy, Luke, had stirred something in her, something she wasn't ready to face. The way he had looked at her, the way his gaze seemed to see right through her, had unsettled. People like us, his words held an unspoken understanding, a knowing. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of connection, not yet. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the small, weathered journal she kept hidden in the folds of her dress. She had written in it on the long nights of her journey, when the loneliness threatened to drown her. The pages were filled with the raw truth of her fears, her doubts, and her fractured hopes. She hadn't written in it since arriving in Redwood Ridge, but tonight she needed the release. The words she wrote were familiar, as if they had been rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. I am not sure what I am looking for. Maybe peace, maybe something more, but I fear I will never find it. I've been running for so long. Maybe I'll always be running. She paused, her pen hovering over the paper. The self-doubts gnawed her, making her question everything. Could she stay here? Could she trust Luke and the promise of safety this town offered? Or would the darkness of her past follow her, dragging her down like quicksand? Her mind wandered back to that night, the night she had fled. The memory of her husband's angry face, his fist slamming into the doorframe as she grabbed what little she could carry, still burned in her mind. She had left without looking back, without a plan, and for months she had kept moving, never staying in one place too long. She couldn't risk it. She couldn't risk him finding her, hunting her down like prey. But now, standing on the edge of something new, something that felt like a possibility, Claire was afraid to believe it could be real. The past had a way of creeping back into your life when you least expected it, like a shadow that never quite left. Maybe you'll never escape. Maybe you'll always be that scared little girl he tried to break. The voice in her head was cruel, but it was hers. She had trained herself to silence, to push the fear aside and keep moving. But tonight, the fear felt louder than ever. And the truth, as uncomfortable as it was undeniable. She was scared. Scared of trusting again. Scared of letting herself believe that she could have something better, something more than what she had known. She looked out the window, her eyes drawn to the dark horizon. The stars above were like pinpricks in the vast, empty sky, tiny beacons of light in the overwhelming darkness. But even the stars seemed far away, unreachable. For a moment, she considered leaving. It would be so easy to pack up her things and ride out into the night, away from everything, away from the cowboy, away from the possibility of feeling something again. She had done it before. She had run before. But then, in the quiet of the room, something inside her shifted. A thought, a feeling, a faint spark of hope. Maybe this time was different. Her hand clenched around the journal, and she wrote again, more urgently this time. I don't know what's waiting for me here, but I know that I can't keep running. I have to face it. I have to face him, and I have to face myself. The words were like a vow, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. But as the candle flickered and the shadows danced on the walls, Claire realized that she didn't have much choice anymore. The running had to stop. She had to stop running from herself, from the parts of her that were broken and scared. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. There would be days when she wanted to give up, when the weight of her past would threaten to pull her under. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something else. Something unfamiliar, the smallest glimmer of strength, a spark of courage. As if the cowboy's words had planted a seed inside her, and now, slowly, it was beginning to grow. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. She didn't know if she was ready to trust Luke or if Redwood Ridge could ever truly be her home. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she was willing to try. She placed the journal down, her heart pounding in her chest. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, but inside, there was a quiet stillness, and with it, a growing sense of resolve. She would not let fear define her. She would not let her past control her future. Tomorrow, she would face whatever came next. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The days in Redwood Ridge passed slowly as the town seemed to settle into a rhythm, quiet yet unyielding, like the desert surrounding it. For Claire, each passing moment felt like a slow unraveling of the life she had tried to leave behind. The cowboy, Luke, remained a quiet presence in the background, always there, but never too close, as if he understood that some people needed time to open up. He would visit the town occasionally, offering a quick word or a helping hand, but always leaving before the conversation could drift into anything too personal. Yet, something about him still gnawed at her, something unsettling and unfamiliar. There were times when she would catch him staring into the distance, his eyes narrowed, like he was waiting for something or someone to come for him. The air around him seemed charged with an unspoken tension, a weight that was hard to ignore. One evening, as Claire made her way to the town's small general store, a peculiar feeling washed over her. The temperature had dropped, and the wind carried the faint scent of something burning, but it was more than just the dryness of the air. It felt as though the entire town was holding its breath. Inside the store, the familiar hum of conversation stopped the moment Claire stepped through the door. The storekeeper, an older man named Sam, quickly turned away, hiding something in his hands. It wasn't unusual for people to avoid her gaze. She'd long been used to the shadows that followed her every move, but the quick exchange between Sam and another figure in the corner caught her attention. The man, dressed in dark, well-worn clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite place. Something wasn't right. She made her way to the counter, but the man blocked her path, his eyes narrowing when at hers. Claire felt a chill run down her spine, but she masked it with a steady gaze. She wasn't going to let fear control her again. "You new around here?" he asked, his voice gruff, almost too casual. Claire nodded, keeping her response brief. "Just passing through." The man didn't seem convinced, but he said nothing more, turning toward the shelf of supplies behind him. The tension in the room lingered, heavy and palpable, as though everyone was waiting for something to break. Just as she was about to turn and leave, the door opened again, and Luke stepped inside, his presence commanding the room. His eyes swept across the store, landing on Claire for a brief moment before turning to face the man who had been eyeing her. The silence deepened. "You planning on buying something, or just taking up space?" Luke's voice was calm, but edged with a warning that only those familiar with the harshness of the West could understand. The man gave a stiff nod, grabbing a few supplies from the counter, but before leaving, he turned to Luke with a look that sent a chill racing through Claire's veins. "I'm sure we'll meet again, cowboy," the man said, his words slow, deliberate. Claire watched as the man left, the tension that had been building finally dissipating, but the unease lingered. Luke turned to her, his face unreadable, and for a moment, she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical force. "What was that about?" Claire asked, her voice betraying the unease she felt. "Nothing to worry about," Luke replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just some folks passing through. Don't mind them." But Claire wasn't so sure. There was something in the way the man had spoken, something that sent a ripple of recognition through her. She had heard those words before. "We'll meet again," the phrase echoed in her mind, and a sense of dread washed over her. Later that evening, as Claire walked back to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening in Redwood Ridge, something bigger than just her personal struggle. She was being pulled deeper into something she didn't fully understand, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to confront it. The next morning, as she made her way to the small creek behind the town, she stumbled upon something unexpected. There, half buried in the dirt, was a weathered map, its edges torn and faded. She knelt down, brushing the dust of the surface. The map was old, but it seemed familiar, its markings oddly specific. Claire felt her heart race. She didn't know why, but something told her this was important, connected to everything that had been happening since she arrived. The map led to a place deep in the mountains to the north, a place marked with an X, but it was the words scribbled across the top that caught her attention. "To those who seek what was lost, beware of what you might find." Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a map, it was a warning. A few hours later, Luke found her by the creek, his eyes flicking down to the map in her hands. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, Claire saw the flicker of concern in his eyes. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice low. It was buried here," Claire replied, her mind racing. "What does it mean?" Luke's face darkened, and he hesitated before speaking. "It means trouble. That's what it means." He didn't elaborate further, but Claire could see the weight of his words settling over him like a storm cloud. She didn't understand, But she knew one thing for sure. This map, this mysterious warning, was more than just a relic of the past. It was a key to something buried deep in the mountains, and something much darker. As the days passed, the tension in the town continued to grow. The man from the store, along with a few others who Claire had seen but never really noticed, began to appear more frequently. They were always talking in low voices, watching the streets as if waiting for something. Claire began to notice that the townspeople seemed more on edge, as if they knew something she didn't. And then the gang arrived. A group of rough men, led by the man she had encountered in the store, rode into town one evening, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they trotted through the streets. They didn't seem like the typical outlaw group. They were too organized, too quiet. They didn't make a spectacle of themselves, but there was an undeniable aura of menace around them. Claire watched from the window of her room as they dismounted, their eyes scanning the town with cold, calculating intent. Something told her they were looking for more than just trouble. They were looking for something specific. And as she stood there, clutching the map in her hands, a chilling realization struck her. Whatever was hidden in those mountains, whatever the map pointed to, was the key to everything her survival, to the dangers surrounding Redwood Ridge, and to the dark past that seemed to haunt the town. The past, it seemed, was finally catching up with them all. The sky seemed darker that night. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, as if even the universe knew that something significant was about to happen. The wind, constant in the west, blew harder than usual, bringing with it a sense of impending change. The air was thick, heavy with the promise of a storm. But it wasn't just the weather that was about to change, it was Claire. She had faced so many moments of doubt, so many moments of fear. The journey that began as a desperate escape from a suffocating past had become something else. Something she wasn't ready to face. But deep down, she knew there was no escaping anymore. The mystery of the map, the constant presence of the gang, and the unspoken words between her and Luke, all of it had led her to this moment. Claire sat in her room, the map still in her hands, her eyes locked on the lines that traced a twisted path towards the mountain. The place marked with an X seemed to draw nearer each day, as if the very land itself was calling to her, as if the history she feared to confront was about to be unearthed. She wondered if the answers she sought would finally heal the wounds in her heart. But at the same time, she felt the fear clutch at her with an inescapable force. The fear that, once she uncovered the truth, she would lose the little piece she had fought so hard to find. The sound of horses' hooves echoed through the town, and Claire knew the gang was drawing closer. She had heard the stories. She knew what those men were capable of. The leader, the man she had crossed paths with at the store, always seemed to be lurking, waiting for something or someone, and she knew that someone was her. But why? What did he want from her? She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to push the thoughts away and focus. I can't run again. I can't live with this fear anymore. Suddenly, Luke's deep voice broke the silence of the night, carrying through the window of her room. Claire, we need to talk. She heard him approaching the door, and for a moment, the impulse to hide, to close her eyes, and ignore the situation was strong. But she knew that wouldn't take her anywhere. This was the opportunity to confront her fears, not just about the strangers invading the town, but about herself, about what she was capable of. She rose to her feet and opened the door. Luke stood there, his face grim, his eyes shadowed with an expression she still couldn't fully decipher. You know what's going on, don't you? He asked, his voice deeper than usual. Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the map in her hands, feeling the weight of the choices that were about to be made. I can't keep running. I can't keep living with this fear. Yes, she finally said, her voice steady but with a resolve she hadn't expected. I have to face it. Everything. Luke studied her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering, as if he was waiting for something, a sign, a weakness, a hesitation. But Claire didn't flinch. She met his eyes fully. Then let's go, he said. But know this, Claire, you won't be doing this alone. We're going to find out what's happening here, and we're going to end it. She felt the weight of Luke's words, but what struck her more than anything was the last part. For the first time, she wasn't alone. For the first time, someone was there, standing beside her, to face what was coming. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was broken by a sound from outside. The hoofbeats were closer now. The low growls and hushed laughter of the gang reached her ears. The confrontation was imminent. Claire felt the fear grasp at her chest, but instead of shrinking back, she took a step toward the door, her newfound resolve firm. She looked at Luke, who watched her in silence. We do this now, she said. There's no more time for hesitation, and it was in that moment that she began to understand. The transformation she had been seeking wasn't a sudden revelation or a physical battle, but something inside herself. She had finally realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. She understood that true power lay in taking control of her own fate, no matter what happened. With the map in hand, she turned to Luke. The path to the mountains would be dangerous, perhaps even deadly, but something inside her sparked. She wasn't running anymore, she was facing it. Beside Luke, with the winds of the west beating against her face, Claire took one last look at the town and the uncertain future that awaited her. But she no longer felt fear. She felt a power within her she hadn't known existed. "Let's go," she said, her voice now full of purpose. And with every step she took, Claire knew she had finally freed herself from the chains of fear. She was ready to face whatever came her way, whatever it was. The transformation hadn't been sudden, but she now understood. True power came from confronting her demons, and in doing so, conquering herself. The day had arrived. The sun hung high over the dry, desolate landscape of the west, casting its relentless heat over Redwood Ridge. The air was thick, the kind of heavy heat that settled deep in your bones and made every breath feel like it was made of sand. Claire stood on the edge of town, the map clenched tightly in her hand, her heart pounding with anticipation. The gang was on their way, and there was no turning back now. Luke stood beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon, the same tension evident in his every movement. He had said little over the past few hours, but his presence was a silent reassurance. They had come this far together, and there was no backing down. "We'll face them together," Luke said quietly, his voice almost lost to the wind. "But you need to trust yourself, Claire. Don't let fear take over." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the mountains far in the distance, where the map had led her. She had come to understand that the true treasure wasn't what she had once thought it would be. It wasn't gold or riches. It was the courage to confront her past, the strength to move forward despite the ghosts that haunted her, and the power to decide her own fate. The sound of horses' hooves grew louder, and Claire's heart skipped a beat. She knew they were close. The gang was nearly there, and everything she had learned up to this point, the lessons she had absorbed, the fears she had faced, would be tested. Luke turned to her, his face grave. "Stay close. Let's not give them a chance to surround us." Claire nodded, a fire igniting within her. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had come too far to let the shadows of her past control her. With one last look at the map, she tucked it into her jacket and prepared herself for what was to come. The gang wasn't just here for the map. They wanted something far more dangerous, the power to control everything in the town. And she wouldn't let that happen. The gang's figures appeared over the ridge, their silhouettes sharp against the sky. They came down the dusty trail with the confidence of men who had seen too many battles and were ready for another. The leader, the man Claire had seen before in the store, rode at the front. His eyes gleamed with malice as he looked straight at her. "There she is," he called out, his voice carrying through the air. "The one with the map. Hand it over, girl, and we'll make this quick." Claire's pulse quick, but her hand tightened around the grip of her pistol. She was no longer the woman she had been when she first arrived in Redwood Ridge. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to hide. "I'm not giving you anything," Claire called back, her voice steady despite the chaos building in her chest. "You want it. You'll have to take it." The gang came to a halt, circling them like wolves. Claire could feel the weight of their gaze, their predatory nature pressing down on her. She knew they were waiting for her to make a move, for her to show weakness, to give them an opening. Luke's hand rested lightly on his own holster, his eyes never leaving the leader. "You're outnumbered," he said, his voice low, but filled with quiet authority. "You'll find we're not so easy to take down." The leader grinned, his teeth bared in a cruel smile. "You think you can stop us? You think you're ready for what's coming?" He motioned to his men. "Take them down." The moment the words left his mouth, the air exploded with noise. The gang surged forward, but Claire was ready. The lessons she had learned over the course of her journey, the importance of quick thinking, of using the environment to her advantage, came flooding back to her. She dove behind a nearby wagon, using its wooden frame as cover. Her heart was racing, but her mind was calm. This was her fight. This was her moment. She peered around the corner of the wagon, her eyes locking onto the leader, who was now barking orders to his men. They were closing in, but Claire had a plan. Luke was already moving, taking cover behind the town's water trough. He fired a shot, aiming for the closest man, his accuracy deadly. The man went down, clutching his side. The rest of the gang hesitated, and Claire used the moment of confusion to make her move. She rolled out from behind the wagon and sprinted toward the next piece of cover, a pile of crates near the far end of the street. Her boots hit the dirt with a force that echoed in the quiet moments between shots. She felt the heat of the sun on her back, the dust clinging to her skin, but it didn't matter. She was moving faster than ever before, every step fueled by a power she had only recently discovered. She was no longer running from her past. She was fighting for her future. She spotted the leader then, his back turned as he gestured to one of his men. With a steady hand, Claire took aim. Her shot rang out, and the leader staggered, a sharp gasp escaping his lips. He turned to face her, fury lighting his eyes. "You think you can stop me?" he snarled, drawing his own weapon. "You're just a woman. You don't stand a chance." But Claire's eyes narrowed, her fingers steady on the trigger. "I've already won," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. With a precise shot, she struck his hand, sending the gun flying from his grasp. He screamed in pain, but Claire didn't hesitate. She was done with fear, done with holding back. She advanced, closing the distance between them, her pistol ready. "You've had your chance," she said, her voice cold and final. "It's over." The leader's eyes flared with rage, but there was nothing he could do. The rest of his gang, realizing their leader was defeated, faltered. They had come for a prize, but they hadn't expected this kind of resistance. One by one, they began to surrender, realizing they had no chance against someone who had found the strength to face their deepest fears. Claire stood tall, her chest heaving with exertion, but her heart calm. She had done it. She had taken control of her own fate, and in doing so, had saved the town. The battle had been fierce, but the true victory was in what she had discovered about herself. Luke approached her, his face unreadable, but his eyes soft. "You did it," he said, his voice low. Claire nodded, the weight of the moment settling over her. "We did it," she corrected, her voice steady. She wasn't alone anymore. She had fought, not just for the town, but for herself. As the dust settled and the sounds of battle faded, Claire took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the victory not just in the defeat of the gang, but in the realization that she had become the woman she had always needed to be. She had found the strength to stand up for herself, to face her fears head-on, and to fight for a future she could finally claim as her own. The treasure wasn't gold, it wasn't wealth, the treasure was her courage, and that was something no one could ever take from her. The dust had finally settled in Redwood Ridge. The sun, now sinking low in the sky, cast its golden glow over the town, bathing everything in a soft, peaceful light. The chaos of the battle was gone, replaced by a quiet, lingering sense of calm. But it wasn't just the town that had changed. Claire stood at the edge of the town, her eyes scanning the landscape that had once seemed so foreign and threatening. She was no longer the woman who had arrived here, unsure and afraid. The woman who had fled her past in search of safety had become someone entirely different, someone stronger, someone who had faced her fears, not just of the gang, but of herself. She had confronted the darkness that had plagued her heart for so long, and in doing so, had found the courage to stand her ground. Looking back at the mountains in the distance, where the map had led her, Claire realized that the journey she had embarked on was never about finding treasure or defeating enemies. It was about discovering who she truly was. The treasure had never been gold or riches. It had always been inside her, buried beneath layers of fear, pain, and doubt. And now, for the first time, she felt whole. She reflected on the path she had walked from the first day she set foot in Redwood Ridge, uncertain of what lay ahead, to the moment she had stood face to face with the gang and made the choice to fight. She had feared that by confronting her past, she would lose herself. But instead, she had found a version of herself she never knew existed, a woman who was brave, capable, and deserving of a future. The journey hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been quick. It had been filled with doubts, moments of fear, and times when she wanted to give up. But each step, each challenge, had brought her closer to the realization that she didn't need to run anymore. She didn't need to hide. She had the strength to face whatever came her way, and most importantly, she had the power to change her own fate. Claire took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling her lungs. Her gaze moved to Luke, standing just a few feet away, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. They hadn't spoken much after the battle, but she could feel the silent understanding between them. They had been through something together, something that had forever changed both of them. Claire smiled softly to herself. She had faced her demons, and in doing so, she had conquered the most difficult challenge of all, accepting herself. She realized now that, much like the people of Redwood Ridge, she had to keep moving forward. The town was safe, the danger was gone, and the mystery was solved. But life wasn't about waiting for peace to find you. It was about creating your own peace, finding it within yourself. no matter the circumstances around you. Claire's reflection was interrupted by the faint sound of a horse's hooves approaching. She turned to see Luke walking toward her. He didn't say anything, but as he reached her side, he simply nodded. The wordless gesture spoke volumes. In that moment, Claire understood they were both different now. She had faced the unknown and come out stronger on the other side, and so had he. They were no longer bound by the past, but were free to walk forward into whatever the future held. As the light began to fade, Claire's thoughts turned inward. She knew that life wouldn't always be easy. The road ahead would be filled with new challenges, but she also knew that she was ready. The strength she had found within herself was not a fleeting thing. It was permanent, and as long as she held onto that strength, she would never feel helpless again. Looking out over the town she had come to call home, Claire whispered softly to herself, "The true treasure was never what I thought it would be. It was the courage to face everything I feared, and to never give up on myself." The journey we undertake is really about the destination. It's about the transformation we go through along the way, the challenges we face, the fears we conquer, and the courage we find in the most unexpected places shape us into the people we are meant to be. For Claire, it was about discovering her true strength and realizing that she could take control of her own fate. And the same can be true for you. Whatever you're facing in your own life, whether it's fear, doubt, or an obstacle that seems insurmountable, know that you have the power within you to overcome it. You are stronger than you think, and the courage to face your fears is already inside you. It's time to embrace it and move forward, just as Claire did. Comment what part of Claire's journey resonated with you the most. Share. Send this story to someone who needs a reminder that they have the strength to face their fears. Subscribe. Receive more inspiring stories like this, delivered to you every day.